You know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. They were the sharpest person in every room they walked into. They saw problems before anyone else did. They asked questions that made people uncomfortable. And then one day, they just went quiet. No big announcement, no dramatic exit. They just stopped showing up. To the parties, to the group chats, to the career ladder everyone else was still climbing. And here's what nobody says out loud. They didn't fail. They didn't crack. Something else entirely happened to them. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that is. Because the answer isn't sad. It's actually one of the most underrated ideas in all of 20th century psychology. Let's start with something you've probably noticed but never had a name for. Think about the most genuinely intelligent person you've ever known. Not just academically sharp, but someone who thought in systems, who saw connections nobody else was tracking, who could walk into a broken situation and immediately understand why it was broken. Now think about where they are today. Chances are they're not running a Fortune 500 company. They're not on television. They're not posting thought leadership content on LinkedIn 3 times a week. They got quieter. They pulled back. They traded visibility for something most people around them couldn't quite understand. And this isn't random. It's a pattern. And it shows up so consistently across history, across cultures, across centuries, that it can't be explained away as coincidence or failure. There's something deeper driving it. Isaac Newton didn't develop his theory of gravitation inside a prestigious institution surrounded by brilliant colleagues. He developed it alone. During the Great Plague of London in the 1660s, he retreated to his family's farm in Lincolnshire. 2 full years of uninterrupted solitude. He called it his annus mirabilis, his miraculous year. The world got calculus out of that silence. Henry David Thoreau walked away from conventional society at 27 years old and spent 2 years at Walden Pond. His neighbors genuinely thought he'd lost his mind. What he produced there shaped American philosophy for the next 2 centuries. Thomas Pynchon published some of the most celebrated novels in American literature while almost completely disappearing from public life. No interviews, no appearances, just the work. J.D. Salinger wrote The Catcher in the Rye, one of the best-selling novels in history, then moved to rural New Hampshire and refused to publish for decades. He kept writing. He just stopped performing. The pattern is everywhere, and it forces a serious question. Is this withdrawal a symptom of something going wrong or something going quietly, profoundly right? The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent decades trying to answer exactly this question, and what he found is one of the most underrated ideas in all of 20th century psychology. Jung observed that every human being is born into a pre-existing script, a set of inherited values, fears, ambitions, and definitions of success that get installed before you're ever old enough to question them. You want what you're told to want. You fear what you're told to fear. You measure your worth by metrics handed to you by your parents, your culture, your employer, your social media feed. And here's the uncomfortable part. You do all of this while genuinely believing you're making free, independent choices. Jung called this identification with the collective. You're so merged with the shared script that you mistake it for your own voice. Now here's where highly intelligent people diverge from the path. At some point, and it's rarely a dramatic moment, it's usually quiet and slow, they notice the script. They start seeing the machinery behind the curtain. They realize that a lot of what passes for ambition is just programmed anxiety, that a lot of what passes for success is just socially approved performance. And once you see that, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Jung called the process of stepping outside this programming individuation, the gradual, sometimes painful work of becoming who you actually are rather than who you were designed to be. But here's what Jung was unusually honest about. Society does not like individuation. Society needs people to follow the script, and when someone starts deviating from it, asking questions that don't have approved answers, living on a timeline that doesn't match the expected one, the collective pushes back. Not always loudly, often it's subtle. You're overthinking it. You're too much. You're not being realistic. You're difficult to work with. And the promotions go to people who are more comfortable, more agreeable, more legible to the people in charge, until the intelligent person makes a quiet, rational calculation. The cost of participation is higher than the reward, so they start to exit. There's something else happening that almost nobody names directly. I want to call it translation exhaustion. When your mind naturally thinks in layers, when you build models, when you hold complexity without needing to collapse it prematurely, every single conversation requires you to compress, to simplify, to drop the qualifications because people find them tedious, to drop the nuance because nuance reads as evasiveness, to say it's complicated and watch eyes glaze over in real time. You do this dozens of days, every meeting, every dinner, every casual exchange. And what most people don't realize is that translation work isn't just socially draining, it's cognitively damaging. Your mind is like a muscle. Use it below its capacity long enough and it doesn't stay sharp, it drifts. The habit of simplifying starts bleeding into your private thinking. The constant performance of being easier than you are starts to hollow you out. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the persona, the mask we wear for the world. For most people, the gap between the mask and the true self is manageable. The mask fits reasonably well, but for someone whose natural way of engaging is deeply out of step with what their environment rewards, that mask becomes suffocating. Picture this. You're in a meeting. Someone presents a strategy with 3 obvious fatal flaws. You see them immediately, not out of arrogance just because that's how your mind works, but the last time you raised concerns this early, you were quietly labeled negative, not a team player, someone who complicates things. So you stay quiet. You watch the plan get approved. You watch it fail 6 months later exactly the way you predicted. And something small inside you dies. This happens again and again. And each time, the gap between who you actually are and who you're allowed to be in that room grows a little wider. Eventually, the performance becomes untenable, and so they stop. They trade the external performance for something internal. They get quieter, harder to reach, not because they've given up, but because they've finally started directing that energy somewhere real. Here's a dynamic that almost nobody talks about openly because it's a little uncomfortable. Highly intelligent people make others feel exposed, not deliberately, not cruelly, just by existing at their natural level. Here's the psychology behind it. When you meet someone physically stronger than you, most people feel admiration. When you meet someone wealthier, maybe envy or aspiration. But when you meet someone who thinks more clearly than you, who asks questions you hadn't thought to ask, who sees implications you missed, something different happens in the brain. Research in social cognition has found that intellectual comparison activates threat responses in a way that physical or financial comparison often doesn't, because your thinking is deeply tied to your sense of identity. If someone challenges the quality of your thinking, even implicitly, even without saying a single word, they're touching something close to who you believe you are. So people defend against it. And the defense rarely looks like defense. It looks like dismissal. They're too theoretical, not practical. High IQ, no EQ. Jung called this shadow projection. When someone's presence highlights your own unexamined limitations, the mind doesn't always respond by thinking harder. Sometimes it responds by deciding there's something wrong with them. The person being projected onto hasn't done anything. They've just shown up at their natural level, and by doing so created an uncomfortable mirror. This is why Socrates was executed, not because his ideas were weaponized, but because his questions made people feel stupid, and that was intolerable. This is why Alan Turing, who arguably shortened World War II by years, was persecuted by the very government he saved. In everyday life, the persecution is more mundane, but it's no less real. You get talked over. Your ideas get credited to someone with a better personality. You're told to work on your communication style, which often means stop making us feel like we're not following. And the intelligent person looks around, makes a quiet assessment, this game is not designed for me to win it honestly, and stops playing. Here's a hard truth about modern culture specifically. We say we value intelligence. We celebrate genius in retrospect, on postage stamps, in biopics, in the mythology of the lone visionary.
But in the actual lived daily reality of institutions, schools, corporations, media, what gets rewarded is depth. It's legibility. It's relatability. It's the ability to make complex things feel simple, which is a very different skill from actually understanding complex things. Think about what goes viral. Short, punchy, emotionally absolute. The moment you say, well, it depends, you've already lost the algorithm. Researchers at MIT found that oversimplified, emotionally charged content spreads dramatically faster than accurate, nuanced information. The platforms aren't neutral. They're actively selecting for a style of thinking that is the opposite of careful. The modern workplace has the same problem. Companies put innovation on their walls. They hire consultants to run creativity workshops, but what they actually promote is competence within the existing framework. The person who says, "I think we're solving the wrong problem entirely," is a threat to stability, to hierarchy, to the comfortable belief that the people in charge know what they're doing. So those people leave, or they're pushed out, and 5 years later the company spends a fortune trying to recreate what that person was doing naturally. Matthias Grigori Perelman solved the Poincaré